I knew something was wrong the second my monitor lit up with a red trace alert at 6:12 a.m. on a Saturday. That's not a metaphor. It was literally glowing, like the system itself was pissed. Someone had tried to override core access on my routing layer and they didn't have clearance. Not a dev, not an admin, an exec, and not just any exec, Chandler Whitaker. The same Chandler who once asked me to my face if I still coded like it was 1998. The same guy who treated technical infrastructure like a vending machine, kick it when it breaks, then blame the person who stocked it. I stared at the log, sipping the dregs of yesterday's coffee, my hair still wet from the shower. Attempted override, privilege level, insufficient. Then again, everything about Chandler was insufficient, except his ego. I took a breath, flagged it, archived it, then waited. Because when someone that high up starts poking around places they don't belong, it's either ignorance or war. And I was ready for both. By the way, if you're listening to this and you like where it's going, take a second to like the video and subscribe. I know 97% of people just lurk, but it really helps the team keep these stories coming. All right, back to it. Now here's what most people at Daxon didn't know. I wasn't a regular employee. Never was. I owned Everbranch Systems LLC, and for the last 11 years, I'd licensed the infrastructure to them directly. They thought they had an in-house engineer with a god complex. What they actually had was a private firm with a licensing agreement written so tight it squeaked. 3-year renewals, custodial protections, escrow redundancies, and one little clause that Chandler either never read or forgot in his rush to play king. The ironic part? I didn't even like control. I didn't care about power plays or politics or which VP sat closest to the CEO during offsites. I liked building things that didn't break. I liked knowing that when 2 departments synced data, the bridge I built wouldn't choke. I liked being invisible. They needed me, but they didn't know why, and I was fine with that, until they started poking. Every system they used, customer data pipelines, product test beds, performance dashboards, ran through my nodes. Most of them didn't even know the difference between a Git commit and a peanut butter jar. The last time the CFO asked how our latency dropped by 30%, I told him optimism compression. He nodded like I'd cured cancer. But somewhere in that penthouse bubble of kombucha taps and rooftop ping pong, someone must have decided I was expendable. And that's when the tremors started. See, when you work quietly for a decade, people start thinking you're a ghost. A background process, easy to kill with a keystroke. But they forget ghosts write wills, and mine was in clause 14b. I printed the trace log and stapled it to the hard copy of the contract. It felt old school, but sometimes you need the slap of paper to make things real. I didn't call, I didn't warn, I let them make the next move. The dumbest thing a CEO can do is fire the person holding the keys while the car is still doing 80 on the highway. And Chandler, he didn't just grab the wheel, he cut the brakes. The conference room on the 20th floor smelled like citrus disinfectant and self-importance. It always did. That floor had a thermostat of its own, cooler than the rest of the building, like even the air had to remind you who ran the place. Chandler was already seated when I walked in, staring at his phone like he was busy pretending not to be an idiot. He didn't offer a chair, didn't bother to look up, just dropped the line like he was reciting the weather. We're consolidating everything in-house. You're fired. Effective immediately. No thank you, no HR rep, no offboarding checklist, just dismissal, as casual as canceling a lunch order. His assistant, some kid who still looked surprised every time a printer worked, blinked behind him. Chandler flicked a hand in his direction like he was brushing away lint. Make sure we've got the credentials to that backend system. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just set my bag on the table, unzipped it slowly, and pulled out the one thing he clearly hadn't counted on, the contract. Not a digital copy, not a link. A real, printed, notarized agreement. The original. I slid it across the table. You might want to reread clause 14b. His mouth twitched like he wanted to say something smug but couldn't find the words. He looked at the page. The clause was highlighted in yellow, crisp, and glaring. Termination of engagement voids operational license and revokes all system rights effective immediately. I watched his eyes hit the signature line. His name, dated 3 years ago, in ink, witnessed, archived, unshakable. I didn't say anything else, no anger, no accusations, just turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard him mutter something to his assistant, something about contacting IT to re-secure the system. I almost laughed. There was no system left to secure, and in a few hours he was going to learn that the hard way. The elevator ride down felt like exhaling a decade of silence. It wasn't relief. Not yet. It was the sound of a switch flipping somewhere deep in the server rooms of Daxon Technologies. A quiet pulse beginning to ripple through their entire infrastructure, unspooling the life support they didn't even know they depended on. They thought they were consolidating. What they'd done, what Chandler had just done, was amputate the nervous system, and the body was still smiling, not realizing it was already going cold. By the time I stepped out into the lobby, my phone buzzed once. A system alert from Everbranch. Daxon's API requests had begun failing authentication. The machine was already dying, and Chandler had pulled the plug himself. At 7:46 that evening, I entered the vault. That's what I called it, my offline setup in the basement. Dual-layer authentication, no cloud, just cold, quiet steel. I sat down at the terminal, logged in, and began disabling the active tokens one by one. It wasn't dramatic, no blinking lights or cinematic countdowns, just a quiet cascade of access-revoked confirmations sliding across the screen. By 8:15, Everbranch's license monitor showed 0 linked endpoints. Daxon Technologies was floating in the dark, still smiling, still breathing. But the IV had been pulled. They didn't feel it at first. Most of their dashboards were set to update every hour. Some cached overnight data. But by 10:23, the gaps started to show. Testing environments froze mid-build. Forecasting tools stopped populating. Department syncs timed out. Customer feedback loops redirected to nothingness. The CTO's nightly backup script returned a 403 forbidden. At 11:57 p.m., Chandler's assistant emailed me. Subject, urgent. Immediate access required. Body. We need to restore dashboard functionality ASAP. Please provide temporary credentials. I didn't wait. I typed 6 words. As of termination, your company holds no active license. Sent. No best regards, no signature, no bridge. I didn't hear back. At midnight exactly, the heartbeat monitor at Everbranch showed 0 pings from Daxon servers. Not delayed, not weak, dead. They were unplugged. Every tool they leaned on, API bridges, email campaign analytics, invoicing modules, product dev timelines, all routed through code I authored, owned, and licensed. And now, without that license, all they had was static and panic. I didn't dance, didn't pour a drink, I just watched. On the system status page, every error message displayed a single footer I'd embedded years ago, almost as a joke. A line no one ever noticed until it was too late. See, Everbranch Systems LLC, license terminated. It was never about revenge. I don't believe in payback for the sake of ego, but enforcement? That's sacred. You sign a contract, you live with it. Or, in Chandler's case, you learn what happens when you ignore the fine print while swinging an axe. And let's be clear, they didn't just lose access to software. They lost operational blood flow. Their entire ecosystem, from client support to vendor management to QA sprints, was built atop my scaffolding. And like any skeleton, once you pull it out, all you're left with is a puddle. At 12:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with one last notification. Daxon, dashboard failures logged 94. I clicked mute. Let them sleep in silence. They earned it. By 8:15 the next morning, Daxon's entire engine had seized. Slack lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Engineers screaming into the void, DevOps trying to brute force access through Jenkins pipelines that no longer existed. Someone tried launching a sandbox environment for QA and got a serverless error that didn't even make sense, because the server didn't exist anymore. I hadn't deleted anything. I'd just taken the power away, pulled the keys from the ignition. The machine was still there, just asleep, and no one knew how to wake it. Marketing was first to panic. Their campaign data was gone. Not corrupted, not misplaced, just inaccessible. The dashboards they used for projections, ad spend, engagement tracking, all funneled through Everbranch's infrastructure. The launch for their upcoming AI product, ironically named Sentience, was now delayed indefinitely. Their own chatbot couldn't even load its training model. Then finance started choking. Couldn't run invoicing. Couldn't batch payroll. A director tried manually exporting CSVs from their shadow copy system and realized it had been a dummy shell for over a year, something I'd set up temporarily during a migration that never got replaced because no one bothered to review it. They'd been operating with a confidence built entirely on trust. Trust in a system they didn't own. Customer support went fully dark before lunch. Their portal returned 503s to every login attempt. People trying to check shipment statuses, billing issues, renewals, they all hit a wall. Social media was the first place it showed up. A few angry tweets, then a thread, then a hashtag. And I wasn't even there. I was in my kitchen, making oatmeal, listening to jazz. A friend from inside, one of the few I actually liked, texted me around 11 o'clock. CTO looks like he's aged 10 years in a morning. He keeps saying, why we didn't know she owned all this. That was the moment it hit them. They didn't just lose a technician. They lost the scaffolding, the wiring, the damn blueprints. And the cherry on top? Someone in the IT department, probably Chandler's golden child, tried resetting a service key. They thought maybe it was just expired. Maybe this was a bug, a patch failure, something they could fix with enough brute force and wishful thinking. Instead, they got a cold, system-generated response, revoked by termination protocol, Section 14B. I almost framed that line. Legal, meanwhile, was in full scramble mode, digging through archives, trying to unearth what Chandler had signed, what he'd actually voided when he booted me like yesterday's lunch order. I imagined some poor paralegal going page by page, discovering that the legacy contractor they dismissed like an inconvenience had full custodial rights to the tech stack. And Chandler? He hadn't read a word. Just assumed. Assumed I'd built it and walked away. Assumed my name on the license meant nothing. Assumed control without asking who actually owned the steering wheel. The building still had power, people still had desks. But the heartbeat of the company, the system that made everything flow, had flatlined. And there wasn't a single person left who knew how to bring it back. Monday mornings at Daxon were usually all-hands caffeine rituals, bagels in the kitchenette, half-hearted jokes about weekend outages, people pretending to be more awake than they were. But this Monday, the only thing brewing was dread. Legal had called an emergency session. Not a meeting, a session. The kind of word that carries weight, like something's about to be dissected and no one wants to be on the table. They packed into the glass conference room on 20. Chandler sat at the head, flanked by the CTO and two red-eyed project leads who hadn't slept since Friday. A couple board observers dialed in remotely. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. My friend texted me in real time from under the table like a war correspondent. Legal started slow. Timeline. Engagement history. The original agreement with Everbranch Systems, signed 11 years prior. Renewals every 3 years, automatically executed unless voided with 90-day notice and board sign-off. Chandler started tapping his pen halfway through, his tell when he felt cornered. Then came the clause. Section 14B, legal read aloud. Termination of engagement voids operational license and revokes all system rights effective immediately. Someone scoffed. Legal didn't flinch. They clicked the remote and a PDF filled the monitor. My final invoice. Not a guess, not an estimate. A number backed by line items, logs, records of service, support calls, code commits, patch notes, all timestamped. And at the bottom, in bold, highlighted yellow, termination activates automatic infrastructure recall. The CTO leaned forward. Wait, recall as in shutdown? No, legal said, as in ownership reverts. Immediately. No backup rights, no transitional access, no grace period. It's not an offboarding, it's a full revocation. Silence. Someone on the call whispered, "So, we don't own anything?" Legal nodded once. This contract wasn't a standard employment agreement, it's a vendor license, with custodial structure. That means the infrastructure belongs to Everbranch Systems LLC, and unless you negotiate new terms they're under no obligation to accept, you're locked out. That's when Chandler finally spoke. Quiet, flat. She was a vendor? Legal looked at him like he'd just confessed to driving blindfolded through a school zone. You didn't read the contract. It wasn't a question. More silence. One of the VPs shifted in their seat, clearly trying to do math in their head. How many systems were impacted, how long this could take to fix, how much it would cost. Then Legal added the line that ended the meeting. You didn't just fire a consultant. You voided every system you rely on because she was the system. Nobody argued, not even Chandler, because there wasn't anything left to say. No rescue plan, no backup lead, no path forward without me, and they all knew it. By Wednesday, the building had the look of a place halfway through a slow-motion implosion, the usual corporate hum. The tap of keyboards, low buzz of conference calls, someone cursing at a printer, had been replaced by the white noise of sheer uselessness. Desks sat quiet while engineers stared at unresponsive terminals. Marketing was using spreadsheets printed out 2 weeks ago. Finance was handwriting checks. HR had started texting applicants because the recruiting system was dead. They even went back to sticky notes for PTO tracking. Sticky notes. In a building that bragged about cloud-native everything. They tried everything. Restoring backups, cloning staging environments, running diagnostics from a clean build they found on an intern's flash drive. But nothing worked. Because it wasn't about data, it was about keys, ownership, authority. And every root-level signature, every validation token, every infrastructure bridge they thought they controlled still pointed to me. And my license wasn't theirs anymore. Even their backups were useless. Because backups don't work if they're encrypted with a private key you no longer own. All they had was a pile of locked doors, and no master key, no override, no backdoor. I built it clean, tight, and compliant. And now, airtight. Mid-morning, Chandler demanded a full systems escalation meeting. The CTO had to explain again why nothing was progressing. Legal had to clarify again that they couldn't even initiate a rebuild without risking litigation. Every clause tied back to Everbranch. Every tool had been licensed, not transferred. That was the whole damn point. Security, modularity, custody. It had protected them for years, until Chandler killed it with one sentence. "Bring her back," he finally snapped. "We need her to unlock it." That's when legal, this time with less patience, replied flatly, "She's under no obligation. You voided every right we had." And then the chairman spoke. He hadn't said a word until that point, just watched. Then came the question. "Did you know you were firing the license holder?" Silence. Chandler stared at the table. Didn't nod. Didn't deny it. Just sat there, eyes fixed on a scuff mark like it held the answers he didn't have the guts to look for. It was over. Everyone in the room knew it. There was only one system still functioning. The public-facing FAQ page. Some junior comm staffer had suggested at least keeping that alive. Something, anything, to show they still existed. They pulled it up to check what it looked like. One section still populated. A timestamp hovered in the corner. Last modified 2 months ago, modified by eBranch admin 01 me. It was almost poetic. The last flicker of life in their empire was a help page I wrote about resetting user passwords, and they couldn't even follow it because every step required access they no longer had. There's a sound buildings make when people give up, a kind of stillness that wraps around fluorescent lights and settles in cubicles like dust. That sound had taken over Daxon, and I didn't need to be anywhere near it to hear it. By Friday, the glass conference room on the 20th floor had turned into a paper morgue. Stacks of documents spilled across the long table. Contracts, addendums, board memos, time-stamped approvals, and the kind of compliance appendices no one ever reads until the building's on fire. The audit team, brought in through an emergency retainer, worked in grim silence, flanked by external counsel and a visibly sweating VP of operations who kept muttering that this had to be a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. They found everything. The original service agreement between Daxon Technologies and Everbranch Systems LLC, signed July 3rd, 2012, renewed in 2015. Again in this time with full custodial amendments that made it airtight. Board approved, legally binding, and more importantly, specifically structured to prevent exactly what Chandler had tried to do. The nullification clause was simple. Termination required 90 days notice in writing, approved by 2/3 of the board, followed by a scheduled operational handover monitored by third-party audit. It was written that way to protect the system from ego, from someone like Chandler, and they hadn't followed a single step. They gave no notice. There was no vote, no handover, just a smug firing and an expectation that the world would stay on autopilot. Meanwhile, Chandler had all but vanished. No meetings, no updates. His assistant resigned midweek, citing medical exhaustion. Word was, she hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 5 days. Legal had tried to onboard a new IT lead in a last-ditch effort to recover control. They gave him a laptop, badge, a temporary login. He tried accessing the admin panel. Permission denied. He tried initiating a system diagnostic. Unauthorized. He tried contacting Everbranch Systems. No response. The poor guy left the building before lunch, muttering something about needing a different kind of job. And then legal found the last nail in the coffin, a document titled Operational Handover Conditions, buried deep in a compliance subfolder they hadn't touched in years. The first line, bold and center aligned, invalidated upon termination, not paused, not pending, invalidated. That one word had more power than Chandler ever did. The infrastructure they thought they could absorb was gone. Not because I sabotaged it, because they killed the contract that made it theirs. I didn't gloat, didn't post anything. I watched the silence stretch across their leadership, watched the buzz die down, the headlines fade. It wasn't a collapse, it was evaporation. Quiet, total. What they'd dismissed as a signature on a contract turned out to be the line between function and failure, and they were on the wrong side of it. They waited 3 days to reach out, long enough to pretend it wasn't desperation, short enough that I knew they were drowning. The message came from the board's legal rep, wrapped in every layer of corporate polish they could summon. No direct acknowledgement of what happened, just a formal invitation for discussion, a proposed retainer that would have made my accountant blush, and a carefully worded paragraph expressing regret over the unexpected circumstances leading to our disconnection. They still couldn't say, "We fired you." Even now, buried halfway down the attachment was a phrase I'd been waiting for: full reinstatement. They were offering everything: total access, retroactive compensation, expanded scope. And then, tucked near the bottom, one more phrase: "We sincerely hope this does not preclude future collaboration." Cute. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the request to a woman named Kira. She runs a systems firm now, brilliant, disciplined, and blunt as a hammer. I trained her back when she was still debugging dependency trees at 2 a.m. Now she writes infrastructure like it's music. Her company would step in, under new terms, under my watch. Everbranch wouldn't dissolve, it would evolve into the overseer. I let her know, keep everything escrow-based, quarterly audits, dual hardware keys, no more cloud-only nonsense. She replied in 2 minutes. Already drafting. The irony, of course, was inescapable. Chandler's whole justification for firing me had been his push to modernize. He wanted a stack that could be rebuilt in-house, managed by fresh blood, centralize, standardize, words people use when they think software is a chair you can just reupholster. His tech vision was to make things seamless, efficient, faster. Instead, the board now issued a full moratorium on infrastructure changes. Nothing new could be implemented without third-party review and external validation. Risk controls were rewritten. Executive privilege over systems was revoked. They couldn't even push a login page update without 2 signatures, a log entry, and a time-stamped key release. The same Chandler who mocked my hard boundaries now sat somewhere, silent, jobless, legacy scorched, watching his innovation roadmap get rewritten by the woman he'd tried to erase. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't need a title, or a banner, or a round of applause. I just needed clarity, and for the first time in a decade, I had it. Control wasn't about being in charge. It was about being immovable when it mattered, and Chandler had finally learned what that looked like by watching it walk away. 1 month later, the lights were back on, but the building felt different. Gone was the breezy confidence, the culture of swagger and shorthand. The systems had been revived, yes, but they came back wearing locks like armor. No more casual changes, no more unsanctioned override attempts. Every click left a trail, every deployment required co-approval, and every engineer now had a compliance binder thicker than a phone book. The login screen said it all. Powered by Everbranch Systems LLC, custodial license active through 2028. All governance requires dual signer ratification. Every screen, every tool, every process bowed to that sentence. My sentence. I didn't need to step foot in their building again. I didn't need to watch them scramble or apologize or spin PR about how Daxon's future is more secure than ever. I'd already heard the spin. Someone sent me a clip from the tech conference they tried to salvage. The new CEO, flown in from a firm out west, took the stage with all the charisma they could scrape together and called the whole ordeal an expensive lesson in arrogance. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I watched the keynote from my home office, robe on, second cup of coffee in hand, cat sleeping on the windowsill. It wasn't smugness. It wasn't victory. just a quiet stillness, the kind you earn after a storm passes and nothing is broken, at least not on your end. They'd asked me to come, by the way, offered a panel spot, travel, hotel, even a speaking fee. I declined. You don't rebuild legacy with press releases. You do it with clean code, strict boundaries, and consequences that hold. They would remember me, not because I made noise, but because I didn't have to. For a decade, I built that company's nervous system with care, precision, and foresight they never appreciated. And in the span of one arrogant meeting, they cut their own spine and learned what happens when the quiet ones walk away. They thought I was just a technician, but I was the foundation they never bothered to understand.